Lassila, who's going to read a paper titled New Mineral Extractivism in Ordinary Citizens' Worlds, Insights from Resistance and Reindeer Herdings in Northern Finland.
The welfare state of Finland has become one of the most inviting countries for the global mining industry. And while in Finland's north, indigenous Sami have been able to more and more articulate their claims for land and cultural continuity, it has been much more difficult to recognize and bring forth those people's relations to the land who have not been most marginal people in the state, but who now experience a threat to their livelihoods and their continuity with their environments when new mining industry enters their land and territories. And these ordinary people might fall behind in environmental struggles inside welfare states that are supposedly equal and transparent. The situation in Finland is anticipating since many new mining projects are still in their exploration phases. Many of the projects concentrate on the central Lapland's greenstone belt, mineral-rich area. And also this presentation is situated in this area, in the right-hand side map in the municipality of Sodankylä, where the British company Anglo-American found an extraordinary ore body under the protected Viiankiaapa peatland in 2009. The ore body is speculated to be the richest copper and nickel discovery in the world in decades. And the peatland where it was found belongs to the European Union Natura 2000 and as well as the national peatland conservation programs. It's a traditional reindeer herding ground of Finnish non-Sami herders and an important place in the history of the nearby Lassila village. The conservation has not stopped the project from proceeding because according to the natural legislation, an environmental conservation area can be compensated by finding a similar area somewhere else so that the mine would be built in 10 to 15 years. The most recent development in the case is the plans of an underground mine where the tunnel to the ore body would be built outside of the conserved area so that the boundaries of conservation would not have to be disturbed. But in all cases, a large-scale environmental and partly unknown environmental transformation is anyhow expected. In the capitalist modernity, knowledge practices that separate nature and humans, that turn into policies where extraction can always bypass conservation, fail to protect people's specific relations with land and rule out the possibility of the multiplicity of worlds and knowledges, as well as the uniqueness of socio-ecological wholes in place and time, in situations where, following Marisol de la Cadena, a place for people is something other than nature. Alberto Acosta has emphasized that a transition is crucial from the idea of capitalist progress to a debate based on several contemporary visions, utopian perspectives, and alternative non-capitalist practices of what living well in the future might mean. So to globally find alternatives to, as well as slow down the current life-threatening processes of extraction, it is equally important to investigate beyond the dominant knowledge practices and even indigenous life worlds in developed countries and welfare states like Finland in the north. So I concentrate on two examples, resistance and reindeer herding in relation to the mining project. In their existence, they can be considered as these alternatives and articulations of the possibility to live well in continuity with the environment outside of the hegemony of extractivism. At the same time, the examples show how people have narrow means to question the assumption of a replaceable and exploitable nature and the development promised by mining industry through other arguments than that of conservation or economically calculable means. Riikka Karppinen was born in the village of Lassila, and she was 15 years old and the only person to emerge against Anglo-American plans in her home area, and the peatland that for her has been an extension of home since childhood. Her grandmother used to own the land under which the ore body was found, and when the people had to sell their lands to the state, when the Natura program was established, they thought that the lands would be protected and everything would stay the same, and berry picking, hunting and fishing and skiing and everything could go on as usual. But now they see this same land being prioritized for companies' profit and perhaps eventually enclosed from people for the mineral excavation. So of course they feel deceived. So she contacted media and politicians, and international media covered her story. At first it was difficult to find support, and but little by little she started to gain support behind public opinions. And then in 2017 she was the first Green Party representative and the youngest person in history to be elected to her municipality's council. And in 2019 parliamentary election she was second to being elected from Lapland's electoral district. So Karppinen's motivations for resistance come from an existential bond to an area of home and belonging and of identity-making meaning. In this sense, her resistance has an ontological stance of what kind of future is imaginable, in what terms her relations to the place can continue. It's not a coincidence that women have been in charge of the many environmental justice movements that have risen in recent years. But on the other hand, Karppinen's public definition of herself as not being a traditional activist girl tells about the difficulty of articulating against patriarchal structures and male-dominated corporations inside which femininity is still considered a weakness. Her case also brings out the contradiction that faces people that communicate existential relations to place inside a state that does not recognize these relations. There are no vocabulary to claim for the total existential losses that extraction might cause locally, and the only language that people can often turn to is that of conservation. But in this case, the conserved area can be replaced, and a mine can be built, or then an underground mine can be built that does not disturb the boundaries of conservation, but will certainly change the place over time. And while the previous example brings out the problem of recognizing people's continuous relations to land beyond the replaceable environmental conservation, the example of reindeer herding brings out the problem that exists to translate livelihood as more than wage work, and thus claim for land against the employment that the mine promises. The mine is expected to affect 2 reindeer herding districts in the area. For one herd of the Oraniemi reindeer district, and it's about 300 to 500 reindeer, this herd would be more directly affected, and the mine would probably mean an end to the herding livelihood in the area. These herders here are not indigenous Sami, but mining affects the continuity of their lives and ignores them in planning as much as the Sami in other parts of Lapland. The interdependent relationship that these non-Sami herders have with land is comparable to an indigenous territorial continuity. For one herd, the peatland is a year-round pasture. The seasonal cycle organizes life for the herders and the reindeer and attaches both the humans and the animals into the abundance of the peatland and its edible plants for the reindeer. What is particular here is that the reindeer are not taken into a shelter for the winter to be fed like reindeer in other districts. After the roundup time of the fall is over, in January the reindeer are herded to places in the peatland where there are spruces or to places where horsetail and buckbean plants have remained over the snow cover. Every morning the herders gather the herd for some supplementary feeding. After that the reindeer find these plants on their own in the afternoon. When the spring sun begins to melt the tree trunks, new food is available again, as the reindeer start to lick the surfaces of birches and other trees for vitamins and nutritious plants. When the snow cover in the peatland begins to melt, the reindeer find more food in stems of trees and, as one herder told me, go after the tussock grass, and finally get along on their own. Herders say that when the reindeer are in the peatland all seasons, they also remain healthier and gain more weight. Compared to working in the mine, reindeer herding is a way of life that does not fit into the modern concept of wage work. It provides income for only a few, and many have other jobs as taxi drivers or construction workers. However, the herders say this is not just a job among others, but a way to be yourself without the need to have a role or a mask for society's expectations. In Viiankiaapa peatland, it's a livelihood not primarily driven by the demand for an increased income and an overall imperative to grow. Other values, such as the continuity with the territory and the relations and the place-based knowledge that the herders and the reindeer share, make the livelihood satisfying. And when mining aims for higher efficiency and use of physical resources until they are depleted, reindeer herding from year to year must function in accordance with the ecosystem. So to sum up, mining industry causes ruptures and novel vulnerabilities in the North's new resource frontiers and also in non-indigenous contexts. These particular worlds are incommensurable with mining. How can we reach them in research, language, and political discussion? When people find it difficult to communicate and legitimate existential relations to land beyond the replaceable conservation, beyond economic meaning, and when small municipalities see mining as development. These worlds in their existence provide alternatives to the nature-human ontology of the capitalist modernity, in addition to already recognized indigenous worlds. So when life becomes more and more uncertain for all kinds of life in places like the Viiankiaapa peatland, these worlds also defend the existence of those living beings, place and time-bound lives that do not have human voice. Thank you.